Welcome to the latest edition of HCTV. According to statistics recently released, the agricultural sector is tipped for its busiest year in history, with the sector expected to be valued at over $70 billion. Indeed, the agricultural sector is one of the success stories of the COVID period, and let's face it, one of the main contributors outside the mineral resources industry to Australia's better than expected economic position. With me to analyse the sector is rural consultant Mark Napper. Mark has over 30 years experience in agribusiness as a CEO, director, senior executive, government advisor and farmer. So he's well placed to help us unpack the industry. Good morning, Mark.
Morning, Blair. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. What are some of the contributing factors to the current positive outlook for the sector?
Yeah, well, it certainly is a really positive, buoyant time for agriculture, as you're saying. We've got new, record harvest forecast. That's on the back, obviously, number of seasons of drought, but we're seeing record harvests, so record yields. And we're seeing, strangely enough, high prices, normally obviously in raw supply and demand markets, such as agriculture. High production means low prices. And this time we're seeing high yields and high prices. And that also, the other factor giving some buoyancy is the low interest rates. And this is happening across the sector. We're seeing ABARES forecasting had an 8% increase in their forecast for September quarter, September 21 quarter from their June quarter. So the buoyancy is still there. We're seeing forecast yields and records across the sectors, whether it be crops, they've got a record 39.5, livestock a record 33.5 billion. This is in their GVPs, and even my dear horticulture, it's got a record 12.4 billion. That's a 4% increase. So we're seeing the high commodity prices coming on because of poor growing seasons in a lot of our competitor exports countries. So it's USA, Russia, Canada. And here we're seeing in the livestock also increase in prices because of the restock that's happening. This is flowing on to export prices as well. And as I mentioned before, the low interest rates is helping to fuel land values as well, as we're seeing low interest rates, high commodity prices. We're seeing farm prices increase, and Collier's Rural Bank came up with a report last week stating that nationally they've seen a 12.9% increase in the median price for a hectare of farmland in 2020. So that's all auguring really well for the farmers, and that increase in land value also is helping farmers restore some of their equity which was lost during the bad times.
We've seen some stories in the media about harvest losses due to labour shortages as a result of the COVID restrictions. What are some of the challenges that the sector's faced as a result of the COVID period?
Yeah, it's been huge. Despite that buoyancy, there's been some really struggles, particularly in horticulture and those that are labour intensive. And the supply of labour, as you mentioned, has had a huge impact on our production. Traditionally, the source of labour we have in farms, you have the local area would be your source of labour, but then when you have the higher peaks in seasonal products like all farming seasonal, I know, but horticulture, there's demands at the hard labour intensive times. There isn't always a willing labour force locally. So traditionally, agriculture has relied on seasonal worker programs, and traditionally that's been from Pacific Islands. Backpackers, and in Byron Bay, my area, that's been a great source of us, Byron Bay being a mecca for the backpackers, and grey nomads. So when then all of a sudden, virtually overnight, you have the country borders closed, state borders closed, that flow of labour has ceased. So it's been a huge impact. And I know personally of farmers who've suffered millions of dollars damage having to leave crop on the ground or in the trees. And they started a national crop loss register. Last time I looked, there was over $60 million recorded losses directly due to non-availability of labour. And the other impact on COVID has been, I mentioned that the borders going down. The shutdown, the lockdowns, has also affected restaurants and cafes. And surprise, surprise, who supplies them? It's farmers. And overnight, almost, they've had lettuces, herbs ready to go to restaurants stopped. So their demand has stopped, and they've had to then not pick that crop. And there's nothing more disheartening than a farmer not being able to pick his crop. And the impact is huge. I've know a farmer, Victorian farmer, has stood down 50% of his workforce, and it's a substantial workforce. So the flow-on effect to the communities and the farms is huge that COVID has had financially, but also we're seeing mental health. It's really affecting employees and those communities. And we're also seeing from COVID, problems if you're in export markets. Well, then we're seeing shipping delays. We're seeing the rise of the sea freight has been huge. Shipping containers, shortage. And so that's affecting canola, pulses, horticulture. We're seeing congestion in ports and airlines not travelling, so that's the air freight shortage. So the impact on COVID to agriculture, and particularly horticulture, has been huge.
But I guess these are the headline figures, which, as we know, are likely to be dominated by the big players in the market. How are the smaller producers faring?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's true in many cases that the smaller guys, ride on the coattails of the larger farms. But from my experience, I found that it's not necessarily size of the farm, which is the biggest determinant of success, but it's more how well is that farm enterprise managed. And I know many well-run smaller family farms that are just highly efficient, highly innovative, and have great, knowledge to be able to across their whole business. And many larger farms, corporate farms, don't have that. They are not well run, and there's a lot of wastage across the whole board, whether it be on farm or it be post farm gate. But however, it's true, and again, particularly in horticulture, that the large farms, and when we say large farms, we mean those with a revenue of greater than 2 million, account for around 10% of farms, but would account for the lion's share of production. And a key problem for all farms, whether large or small, is working capital, adequate working capital. And this has really been exacerbated in the last few years of consecutive poor seasons, consecutive years of drought. So larger farms may have access or easier access to a larger source of funds, whereas the smaller farms aren't. They're feeling that pressure of inadequate funding and not having sufficient funds to be able to plan out the whole farm this season, or not being able to restock their herd, because you would remember that during the drought, people destocked. People are actually getting rid of some of their breeding stock. So if you're in that situation, trying to rebuild your stock again and not adequate source of working capital to farms, that can be a real issue, which seems to impact more, I think, the small family farms. And another factor also is labour, which we just mentioned. And historically, smaller farms have a lower percentage cost of labour. And that's because they rely on the old family, unpaid family labour, as my mates come up from farms, say the old slave labour factor. And so they've been able to, family farms, respond to adjustments in COVID by just drawing on, manoeuvring within the family. That's not the case for larger farms. So larger farms have had to pay more to get labour, increase higher costs, whether that's accommodation or drawing labour in from overseas. And so they've not been able to, have that flexibility as the smaller farmers would. But larger farms, in summary, I would say then that smaller farms in this time are struggling more than what the larger farms would be in that access to the working capital.
Given the agricultural space is subject to so many variables, which are often outside the producer's control, we know the good times can't last forever. What steps would you can producers take now to effectively future-proof their businesses for when the inevitable contraction does come?
Yeah, it's interesting because ABARES are actually forecasting that in 2022, 23, we're going to see a bit of a decline in that as commodity prices come off. And headline figures like that is no different to seeing record prices in the ASX 200. It all sounds wonderful at that top level. When you draw back the curtain a bit and look in at the individual enterprise level, you get a bit of a different story, And I think a lot of farmers, a bit like me, they're intuitive. Their gut tells them from experience this is what they should be doing. However, I've had to, on my farm and in my firm, rein that in by actually testing it, doing some of the analysis and put some meat around the bones on what my intuition is telling me. And that means I've got to take time to figure out, okay, where am I now? Where do I want to go? And how am I going to get there? I mean, fairly basic stuff, but you need to really do that in these good times as well, because there are tremendous opportunities and we need to be able to exploit those. So my advice is really that people need to be able to first just step back and say, where do I want to be in the next 5 years? What's my plan? Do I want to exit? Is that exit meaning a sale, or is it succession? Or is it expansion? I want to invest, I want to buy that block next door. I want to invest in new equipment to get that innovation or efficiencies across the farm. And the next thing, you've got to know your business and know your costs and your choke points. What is my cost of production? What is my labour cost? What are all those basic essential costs that you need to get around? And where are the choke points within the whole farming system, whether that's on-farm or post-farm gate? And both of those are essential, whether you're going to exit or whether you're going to expand. Right? And then you need to decide on your risk appetite and what's your risk capability. And to do that, you've got to do some what-if type scenarios. Interest rates are low now, but what happened, we're already seeing some lifts, like New Zealand are putting up theirs, probably see some sort of lift in interest rates. So what's that going to do if interest rates go to 5%, 6%, 7%? What does that mean to my position now? And what are some of the other stress tests in terms of, well, what if income drops off? What if there's another yield, another COVID or whatever? There's so many factors in agriculture that are outside our control. So you need to do that scenario analysis on that. And also know the level of gearing. What is your level of gearing based on that risk capability that you need now and in the future? Because the strategy may mean that it's best for you now to pay down debt. Low interest rates, let's get the debt down and let's just restore the profitability so we're sustainable for the next 10 years. Or you may want to undertake some debt restructuring, depending on what your analysis comes up with. And there's many innovative people out there coming up with some great products now for refinancing. And so it's always worth investigating those. Let's just have a look and see what is available. Or you may want to invest in innovation. I was saying that there's robotics and AI, lots of stuff happening on farm now. It's just a hotbed of innovation and that post-farm gate improvements. And so, it could be, however, like when you do look at your current levels, that you get concerned about your debt equity ratio and you're struggling to make repayments, even paying it down. And my strong advice to growers is don't put your head in the sand. If you've got those issues, raise them now and sort them out now and get a sensible, putting your head in the sand isn't a sensible or sustainable strategy. Let's deal with them and get the advice. And lastly is to have a marketing plan. Know your market, your customers, know your story. Consumers and the market loves to connect with the growers. So know your story. Investigate alternative channels. There's heaps now with e-commerce on B2C. I'm not saying all your product can go B2C. Even on my farm, I can't sell it all B2C, but I can sell part of it. And that's a risk mitigation strategy. And so investigate product expansion to whether it's value-adding products or longer life. the longer shelf life has become a huge issue in emerging issue too within horticulture. So there's some of the tips that I would say for people to do now.
Just in your own business, Mark, how do you help producers in agribusiness?
Yeah, well, I help them really just get a deeper understanding of their business. You know, I come from someone who's lived it and knows it. I've sweated times of not being able to pay my wages, and am I going to make that loan repayment? So the first thing I do is help them understand or undertake a financial or a business health check. Really includes financials, but includes across the whole business. I help them then develop, sustainable business plans. What a practical business plan that you can actually do. But sometimes, those business plans actually become a rescue plan, or I like to refer to them as a restoration plan. It's like you restore the old tractor, or you restore the block, or you have to do some rework on your trees. Maybe you need to restore the farm too. And we need to then look at debt restructuring, whether that's formally or informally, and whether it's negotiation with secured lenders, credit suppliers, etc. I help them do that. I also do mentoring for owners and senior executives, and guide and assist people in the implementation of succession plans, because people often have their corporate and tax structures in place, and then, well, how do we actually implement that on a day-to-day basis? How does the incumbent generation nervously let go of the reins to the new generation and have some comfort around how the business is going to operate? So that's basically the 5 areas that I help people in.
Well, I'm pleased to announce a strategic partnership between Mark and Hall Chadwick with respect to business improvement in the agri space. So no doubt we'll be speaking with Mark much more in the future. Thanks for your time, Mark, and that probably brings us to an end of this edition of HCTV. So thanks very much for your time as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Blair.